I grew up in a colonial-style house on the outskirts of Richmond, Virginia, a kind of home that people passing by would admire. It sat back from the road, framed by tall oaks whose branches curved protectively over the roofline, and a white picket fence that stretched neatly around the front yard. The shutters were painted a crisp white, matching the wraparound porch where my mother often placed baskets of blooming geraniums in the summer. Neighbors used to tell her how lucky I must have felt to live there, in such a warm and welcoming place. What they never knew, what they could never guess from the outside, was that the house had never truly been mine. Inside those walls, it was not comfort I felt, but judgment, comparison, and eventually exile. My mother, Margaret, liked appearances. She was the kind of woman who could smile graciously at neighbors and charm them with stories about her wonderful daughter, only to turn cold the moment the front door closed. To her, I was never quite enough. If I brought home a B on a test, she wanted to know why it wasn't an A. If I cleaned my room, she would run her finger across the dresser and frown at the faint line of dust she found there. Even when I tried to win her approval by joining the choir, learning piano, or keeping my grades high, her eyes would narrow with something like disappointment, as though no effort I made could fill the void she carried inside her. Still, for years, I clung to the hope that one day she might see me and be proud. I remember practicing Beethoven pieces until my fingers cramped, just so she could hear me play smoothly. But when I called her into the living room one evening to show her, she glanced at the clock and said she didn't have time. "Maybe later," she muttered, reaching for her glass of white wine. I told myself she was tired from work, that tomorrow she would sit down and listen. Tomorrow rarely came. Then came Gregory. I was 11 the year she remarried, and I convinced myself things might change for the better. Gregory was a tall, soft-spoken man who worked as a contractor and made decent money. He owned a few rental properties around the city, and he spoke with a calmness that seemed foreign in our house. He had a daughter, Olivia, who was about my age. When my mother first told me about them, I felt an uneasy mixture of excitement and dread. Maybe, I thought, our family could finally feel complete. Maybe I'd have a sister to share secrets with, someone to giggle with late at night, someone who might stand by me. I could not have been more wrong. From the day Olivia walked into our home, suitcase in hand, she stole every ounce of oxygen from the room. She was beautiful in a way I was not. Green eyes that sparkled, long auburn hair that fell in perfect waves, a smile that could melt even the harshest heart. Teachers adored her, neighbors gushed over her, and Gregory treated her as if she were made of glass. My mother fell for her instantly. The way she fussed over Olivia's hair, the way she listened intently to her chatter about school, the way she called her my sweet girl with a tenderness I had never once heard directed at me. It all made my chest ache. At first, I tried to be kind. I helped her unpack, showed her the swing in the backyard, and even let her borrow my books. But within weeks, it became clear that I wasn't gaining a sister. I was being pushed aside. My achievements, whether it was scoring well on a history, exam, or practicing scales on the piano, were brushed off. Meanwhile, Olivia's smallest efforts, like drawing a crooked flower or reciting a few lines in a school play, were celebrated as though she had climbed Mount Everest. "Isn't she talented?" my mother would gush to Gregory, her voice filled with admiration. I sat quietly in the background, invisible. The real battles began over space. My bedroom, painted soft blue with posters of my favorite bands, had always been my sanctuary. It was the one place where I could breathe without judgment. But my mother decided Olivia should share it with me. I resisted. I begged to keep it as mine alone, explaining that I needed privacy, that it was where I studied, that I wasn't ready to give it up. That night, Olivia threw a dramatic fit in the kitchen, tears streaming down her face as she sobbed into Gregory's chest. She told them I was cruel, that I didn't want her there, that I hated her. The next morning, I overheard my mother on the phone with a neighbor. "Olivia is such a blessing," she said, her voice full of warmth. "Honestly, she feels like the daughter I always wished for." I froze in the hallway, my throat tight, my body trembling. That single sentence cut deeper than any punishment or scolding ever had. It was confirmation of what I had long feared. No matter what I did, I could never be enough for her. From then on, life in that colonial house became unbearable. Olivia found subtle ways to tighten her grip. She borrowed my clothes without asking and then claimed I had offered them. She whispered little lies to my mother about me breaking rules, staying out late, or failing classes. When I protested, my mother's sharp eyes landed on me with contempt. "Why can't you be more like Olivia?" she would say, her words like stones thrown against my skin. The unfair comparisons chipped away at me piece by piece. I stopped bringing home report cards because I knew they would only be measured against hers. I stopped practicing piano because what was the point if no one cared to listen? At night, I would lie awake in that shared room, staring at the ceiling as Olivia snored softly beside me, wondering why my mother had chosen her over me. There is one memory that lingers more than others. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind of humid Virginia day where the air feels heavy and still. My mother hosted a barbecue for neighbors, and the backyard was filled with laughter, the smell of grilled chicken and the hum of cicadas. I helped set up the tables, carried pitchers of lemonade, and made sure the condiments were in order. Olivia floated through the crowd in a sundress, giggling as she handed out paper plates. My mother followed her with proud eyes, telling anyone who would listen how helpful and charming her stepdaughter was. Not once did she mention me, though I was the one running back and forth to keep everything organized. Later, when the guests left and the yard was littered with paper cups and napkins, my mother called Olivia into the kitchen to thank her for making the day perfect. I stood there, sweaty and exhausted, waiting for some acknowledgement. It never came. I went to bed that night with the smell of smoke and barbecue still clinging to my hair, my chest hollow with the certainty that no matter how hard I tried, I would always be second best. That was the summer I began to retreat inward. I spent hours sitting on the porch swing after everyone else had gone to bed, listening to the creak of the chains and staring out at the darkened street. I wrote in journals, pouring out feelings I couldn't voice aloud. I prayed for escape, though I had no idea where I would go. That house, so admired by others, felt less like a home and more like a gilded cage. It was in that season of quiet despair that I came to a painful realization. I no longer belonged there. The house with the white shutters and wraparound porch, the house that neighbors praised as charming and beautiful, would never truly be mine. I was living in borrowed space, overshadowed by a girl who had taken my place in my mother's heart. I didn't know it then, but the years ahead would demand strength I didn't yet have. They would test me, break me, and eventually rebuild me into someone unrecognizable from the girl sitting lonely on that porch swing. But in that moment, as cicadas buzzed in the humid night air, all I felt was the aching certainty that I had been pushed aside in my own home, and that no amount of trying could ever bring me back. By the time I turned 16, I had already learned that Olivia wasn't just content with stealing my mother's affection. She wanted to destroy me completely. At school, her charm worked. Like magic. Teachers adored her. Classmates hung on to her every word. She wore her popularity like a crown, while I existed in the shadow she cast, and she made sure everyone knew exactly where I stood. It started small, little lies whispered in hallways. She told people I copied homework, that I snuck cigarettes behind the gym, that I was jealous of her looks and tried to sabotage her friendships. At first, I brushed it off. Teenagers thrive on gossip, and I hoped people would see through her performance. But Olivia had a talent for twisting truth until it snapped into something believable. By the end of freshman year, I was the liar, the desperate girl, the one who would never measure up. One afternoon, I walked into the cafeteria to find an entire table go silent. Olivia sat at the center, her perfect smile stretched across her face as she leaned in to whisper something to the girl next to her. They both laughed, and all eyes shifted toward me. My tray trembled in my hands. I wanted to vanish into the floor. When I finally sat down, a boy muttered under his breath, "Don't let her near your wallet." Olivia had told them I was stealing from lockers. I hadn't taken a dime, but my protests only made me look guilty. The cruelty escalated. She convinced a teacher that I had vandalized a bulletin board. She framed me for skipping class by handing in homework with my name scribbled at the top. And at home, my mother always sided with her. If Olivia accused me of something, Margaret believed her instantly. It didn't matter that I had proof that my record had always been clean. My word was worthless in her eyes. Gregory would shake his head, sigh heavily, and say, "We've tried everything with you." The final blow came one Friday evening, just as spring slipped into early summer. That morning, I had noticed Olivia rifling through my backpack when she thought I wasn't watching. I asked what she was doing, and she claimed she was looking for a pencil. My gut twisted, but I didn't press. Hours later, during the last period, the school counselor appeared at my classroom door and asked me to step outside. We walked silently down the hall, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, until we reached her office. My backpack sat on her desk, unzipped. Inside were 2 small plastic bags of pills and a half-empty bottle of vodka. My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. "This was found in your possession," she said gently, though her eyes held suspicion. "It's not mine," I choked out, panic rising in my throat. "I don't know how it got there. I swear." But my words bounced, uselessly against her skepticism. Within an hour, my mother and Gregory were called. They arrived furious, storming into the office with Olivia trailing behind them, her face the picture of innocence. "She's always been trouble," my mother said coldly, crossing her arms. Gregory shook his head in disappointment. "We warned you about this kind of behavior." Tears streamed down my face as I pleaded, "I didn't do it. Olivia." But the moment her name slipped from my lips, Olivia let out a soft gasp, tears glittering in her eyes. "How could you blame me?" she whispered, clutching her father's arm. "I just want her to get better." The counselor looked at me with pity. My mother looked at me with disgust, and I realized with sickening clarity that nothing I said would matter. The decision had already been made. That night I was told to pack my things. No discussion, no second chances, no belief in my innocence. My mother stood in the doorway of my room, her expression hard, her arms folded. "You brought this on yourself," she said, her voice cutting like glass. "You're not welcome here anymore." I stuffed my clothes into 2 suitcases, my hands shaking. $60, every cent I had saved from babysitting, was tucked into my wallet. That was it. 16 years old, and my life reduced to 2 bags and a few crumpled bills. When I dragged my suitcases down the front steps, I paused at the bottom. The colonial house loomed behind me, its white shutters glowing faintly in the porch light. For the first time, I saw it clearly for what it was. Not a home, but a place that had taken more from me than it had ever given. The porch light flickered above me like the last glow of a dying star. Then the door slammed shut. The silence on that sidewalk was deafening. I sat on the curb, tears streaming down my cheeks, my body trembling in the humid Virginia night. Cars passed now and then, headlights flashing, but no one stopped. I thought about sleeping at the bus station. I thought about calling my father, but the man who had abandoned us when I was 2 had long since vanished from my life. For the first time, I felt truly, terrifyingly alone. And then my phone buzzed. It was Emily, my best friend. When I finally croaked out what had happened, she didn't hesitate. "Stay right there," she said. "I'm coming." 20 minutes later, headlights swept across the street and Emily's old Honda pulled up. She jumped out, her face stricken with worry, and threw her arms around me. I collapsed into her embrace, sobbing into her shoulder. She didn't ask if it was true. She didn't demand explanations. She just believed me. That small act of faith was more than I had ever received from my mother. Emily's parents, Diane and Robert, welcomed me into their red brick townhouse in downtown Richmond without hesitation. Their home smelled of cinnamon and fresh laundry, a stark contrast to the cold, perfumed air of my mother's house. Diane ushered me inside, sat me at the kitchen table, and slid a plate of food in front of me. "Eat," she said gently. "You're safe here." That first night, I lay awake in the guest room they had prepared, staring at the ceiling. My suitcases sat neatly against the wall. For the first time in years, I felt the possibility of belonging. Diane had hugged me before bed, whispering, "You're part of this family now." Those words stitched together a wound I thought would never heal. Over the next weeks, their house became my refuge. Diane taught me how to cook simple meals, her laughter echoing through the kitchen as we burned pancakes or spilled flour on the floor. Robert, who worked as a history teacher, helped me with school assignments late into the evening. Emily sat with me on the roof, legs swinging over the edge, as we watched the city lights flicker in the distance. But beneath the safety, grief simmered. I had been abandoned by the woman who gave me life, replaced by someone she deemed more worthy. That knowledge sat heavily in my chest, a reminder that no matter how kind Diane and Robert were, they could never erase the scars my mother had left. Still, in their home, I found something I had never known before: unconditional kindness. A roof over my head that didn't come with expectations. A family who saw me, not as a problem to be fixed, but as a person worthy of love. And slowly, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could build a life beyond the ruins of the one I had lost. Living with Emily's family gave me the stability I had always craved. For the first time, I had a sense of security that didn't come with conditions. I woke up to the smell of Diane's coffee brewing in the mornings, the sound of Robert humming as he graded papers in his study, and Emily knocking on my door to ask if I wanted to walk to school together. Their red brick townhouse in downtown Richmond became more than just a shelter. It was a second chance. I threw myself into school, determined not to waste the gift they had given me. I enrolled at the local community college after high school, taking courses in business administration. It wasn't glamorous, and the classroom smelled faintly of chalk dust and industrial cleaner, but it was mine. I sat in the front row, eager to absorb everything, because I knew education was my ticket out of the past. At night, I worked at a small diner off Broad Street, serving plates of pancakes and bacon to weary truckers and late-night students. The pay was minimum wage, but tips added up. Every crumpled dollar bill I tucked into the jar in my dresser felt like another brick in the foundation of a life I was building from scratch. There were nights I came home exhausted, my feet aching, my hair reeking of grease, but I never complained. I reminded myself that I was investing in myself, that every long shift was a step further from the humiliation of being thrown out of my mother's house. By the time I turned 21, I had saved almost $8,000. It wasn't a fortune, but to me, it represented freedom. With that money, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I moved to New York City. The first months in Brooklyn were a shock. My apartment was a shoebox, barely big enough for a bed, a desk, and a narrow dresser. The walls were scuffed, the plumbing groaned like it was on its last leg, and the single window overlooked a brick alley that let in only slivers of sunlight. But when I turned the key in that door for the first time, I burst into tears of joy. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time, I could shut the door and know I was safe in a space that belonged entirely to me. New York had a rhythm that both terrified and thrilled me. The subways rumbled beneath my feet, the streets buzzed with the energy of people, chasing dreams, and every corner cafe seemed to promise endless possibilities. I worked 3 different jobs to keep myself afloat. Mornings at a bookstore cafe, evenings answering phones at a law office, and weekends waiting tables at a bistro in Manhattan. I lived off ramen noodles and dollar pizza slices, but I didn't mind. Independence tasted better than anything money could buy. Somewhere in the chaos, I began to focus on myself in ways I never had before. I took up running in the mornings, circling Prospect Park as the sun rose. At first, I could barely make it a mile without stopping, gasping for air, but I pushed through. Slowly, the weight I carried, both on my body and in my heart, began to melt away. By the end of 2 years, I had lost nearly 40 pounds. My reflection changed, yes, but more importantly, my spirit did. I stood taller. I looked people in the eye. I realized I was no longer the timid girl who had been cast out with 2 suitcases, and then came Michael. It was an ordinary afternoon at the bookstore cafe, the kind of day when I was restocking shelves and wiping down tables between lattes. He walked in wearing a tailored navy suit, his presence commanding without being overbearing. He picked up a novel from the display, something by Steinbeck I remember, and when he reached the counter, he asked me if I had read it. I told him I had, and before I knew it, we were discussing literature, favorite authors, and the way certain books had shaped our lives. What struck me wasn't just his intelligence, but the way he listened. Listened. His eyes didn't wander to his phone or the clock. They stayed on me, as though what I said mattered for someone who had spent years feeling invisible. That simple act of attention was revolutionary. Michael returned the next day and the day after that. Eventually, he confessed he didn't even like coffee all that much, but he kept coming back because he wanted to see me. We began taking walks after my shifts, wandering through the streets of Brooklyn, sharing stories about our childhoods, our fears, our dreams. He told me he ran a mid-sized tech firm in Manhattan, which explained the suits, but he never made me feel small for not having his success. Instead, he admired my grit, my determination to carve out a life from the scraps I had been given. Months turned into years, and our bond only deepened. With him, I discovered what love could be: patient, steady, safe. He never raised his voice in anger, never made me feel like I had to compete for his affection. He saw me, the real me, and he loved me for it. The night he proposed is etched in my memory like a painting. We were walking across the Brooklyn Bridge, the city lights glittering against the dark sky, the East River shimmering beneath us. He stopped halfway, turned to me, and took my hands in his. From his pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box. When he opened it, a sapphire ring set in white gold caught the glow of the streetlights. "I know your past hasn't always been kind," he said softly, "but I promise you a future filled with love, respect, and partnership. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred my vision as I whispered yes. The ring sparkled on my finger, but it wasn't the $5,000 price tag that made me cry. It was the meaning behind it. That ring was more than jewelry. It was freedom. It was resilience. It was proof that the girl who had once sat crying on a sidewalk with 2 suitcases could rise, rebuild, and find joy. As we stood there, the wind whipping through my hair, the city stretching out before us, I realized something profound. My past had not broken me. It had forged me. Every cruel word from my mother, every lie from Olivia, every sleepless night of loneliness and hunger had shaped me into someone strong. Enough to claim this moment. The colonial house in Richmond had once been my prison. But here, in the heart of New York, hand in hand with Michael, I knew I had finally found something far greater than a house. I had found a home. News travels fast in families, even broken ones. By the time Michael and I had settled into our engagement, bliss, with wedding plans quietly unfolding, word of my happiness had already trickled back to Virginia. I had not spoken to my mother in years, but through the grapevine of distant relatives and social media whispers, she and Olivia knew more about my life than I would have ever offered them. Olivia had married a man named Richard, a tall, broad-shouldered man who worked at a logistics company based in Chicago. He had the kind of charm that could win over investors at a dinner table, but also the arrogance of someone who thought his success would last forever. For a while, they seemed to thrive, flaunting vacations to Europe on Instagram, posting photos of a new house in suburban Illinois, complete with manicured lawns and a 2-car garage. My mother would sometimes comment on Olivia's photos with heart emojis and words like, "So proud of you, darling." It was the approval I had begged for my entire childhood, now given freely to someone else. Life has a way of shifting when you least expect it. Michael's firm, which had grown steadily over the years, made the difficult decision to sever ties with Richard's company after uncovering a series of contractual violations. It wasn't personal, it was business. Their logistics firm had failed to deliver on agreements, cutting corners that put millions of dollars at risk. Termination of the contract was inevitable. Richard lost his position within weeks, and Olivia's world began to unravel. The glamorous photos dried up. The smiles looked tighter, the captions more bitter. And then, like clockwork, she turned her rage toward me. She went public on social media, spinning a story that I had manipulated my fiancé into destroying her husband's career. In a lengthy Facebook post, she painted herself as the victim of a vindictive stepsister who had never let go of childhood jealousy. "She's always hated me," Olivia wrote, her words dripping with venom. "And now she's using her fiancé's company to ruin my family's livelihood." Revenge is all she's ever wanted. Within days, the whispers spread. Old classmates messaged me, curious if it was true. A few even accused me outright. Did you do that? One former friend asked bluntly, as though the girl they had known in high school, the one who had been framed for pills and vodka, was still guilty until proven innocent. For a moment, I felt the familiar panic claw at my chest. It was as if my past had crawled out of the grave to drag me back down, but I was not that scared 16-year-old anymore. I was not the girl with trembling hands and 2 suitcases sitting on a curb. I had built a life on truth, resilience, and hard work, and this time, I was not alone. Michael stood firmly by my side. When the accusations began to spread, he sat me down at our kitchen table in our apartment overlooking the East River. His hand closed around mine, warm and steady. "Let her talk," he said softly. "We have the truth, and the truth will stand." His legal team went to work. They compiled contracts, email chains, and performance reports, each one a brick in the wall of evidence proving that Richard's downfall had been entirely his own making. The violations were clear: missed deliveries, falsified data, and a pattern of negligence that no reputable firm could ignore. Olivia's narrative crumbled in the face of hard facts. Still, she pushed. She filed a civil suit, demanding damages and publicly accusing me of intentional interference. The day I was served the papers, my heart sank. Even knowing the truth, I couldn't stop the flood of old fears. Would the court believe me, or would history repeat itself? Would I once again be cast out, branded as a liar? The weeks leading up to the trial were a blur of depositions and legal meetings. Olivia sat across from me in those sterile rooms, her smile sharp and smug, as though she had already won. My mother accompanied her, sitting in the back with narrowed eyes and crossed arms, her presence a reminder of every wound she had inflicted. The trial itself felt like reliving every injustice of my childhood, but with one difference. This time, I had someone fighting for me. Michael's lawyers presented the evidence with precision, dismantling Olivia's claims piece by piece. When the emails were read aloud, proof that Richard had known about the violations long before I even entered the picture, Olivia's confident mask began to crack. I sat silently, my hands clenched in my lap, as the judge reviewed the evidence. In those tense hours, my mind flashed back to the school counselor's office years ago, when the planted vodka bottle and pills had sealed my fate. Back then, no one had believed me. Back then, I had been alone. But now the truth was undeniable. When the ruling came, the judge's voice was calm and final. The case was dismissed. Olivia's accusations had no merit. Her husband's company had collapsed by its hand, not through any malicious scheme of mine. The relief hit me like a wave. Tears welled in my eyes as I gripped Michael's hand. Outside the courthouse, the spring air felt sharper, fresher, as though the world had been cleansed of a lingering poison. Olivia and my mother stormed past, their faces twisted with anger, but they no longer had power over me. Their shadows no longer reached into my light. In that moment, standing on the courthouse steps, I felt an unshakable calm settle over me. For the first time, I understood that my life was truly my own. Olivia's bitterness, my mother's betrayal, the years of being pushed aside, they no longer defined me. What defined me was the life I had built, a career I had fought for, a body I had strengthened, a love that held me steady through the storms. That night, Michael and I sat on our balcony, a bottle of wine between us, the city skyline glittering like a promise. I leaned into him, the weight of years finally lifting. "Do you realize," I whispered, "that they can't touch me anymore?" He kissed the top of my head. "They never could. They just made you believe they could." I thought of that colonial house in Richmond, the wraparound porch, the flickering light, the place that had been painted as a dream but had felt like a prison. For so long, I had seen it as the home I lost. But in that moment, I realized it had never been a home at all. My true home was here, built on resilience, honesty, and the family I had chosen for myself. Freedom is not just walking away from those who hurt you. It is knowing they no longer have the power to write your story. And as I looked at the city spread before me, Michael's hand resting firmly in mine, I knew one thing with certainty. My story was finally my own.